He saved millions but couldn't save himself. The applause was deafening as Liam Hayes stepped onto the stage of the Manhattan Tech Summit, the culmination of a decade of breakthroughs in oncology. He was the man who had promised to make cancer history, the visionary CEO of Hayes Therapeutics, the man whose name had become synonymous with hope. Cameras flashed like lightning, thousands of faces illuminated by screens and anticipation. He smiled for the crowd, his voice calm yet distant, as if echoing from somewhere far inside himself. Tonight, he was supposed to announce the drug that could stop metastasis, a therapy that might redefine human survival. But as he stared at the teleprompter, the words began to blur. His hand trembled, gripping the edge of the podium. The applause still roared, but in his head it sounded like waves crashing over a sinking ship. He blinked, trying to focus, yet the light seemed too bright, too white. He could hear the faint click of a heartbeat monitor from a memory long buried. The faces in front of him melted into a haze. Then came the dizziness. The room tilted. The audience gasped as the man who saved millions staggered forward. His microphone fell with a metallic thud. He collapsed to the floor in a tangle of wires and spilled light. The live stream froze mid-frame before it flooded social media within minutes. The hashtag Billionaire collapse trended #1 worldwide. Some called it karma, others called it tragedy. A tweet went viral. The man who played God just met him. When Liam opened his eyes, the ceiling above him was sterile white. A pulse monitor blinking beside his bed. The smell of antiseptic filled his lungs. He tried to speak, but his throat burned. The nurse whispered, "Mr. Hayes, you're at Mount Sinai Hospital. You had a seizure. The doctor will be here soon." He turned his head slightly, catching his reflection in the window, city lights flickering across the glass. His once confident face now pale and sunken. His eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The door opened and Dr. Ruiz walked in, chart in hand. "Liam Hayes," she said softly, "stage 4 bone marrow cancer. You may have 6 months, maybe less." The words didn't shock him. They sank quietly, like stones into deep water. 6 months. He nodded once, almost relieved. There was no plea, no denial. Only a faint realization that all his billions, his empire of labs and patents meant nothing against the silence waiting at the end. Outside his room, reporters camped beneath the hospital entrance. A drone hovered, trying to capture footage of the fallen giant. CNN replayed the clip in slow motion, his body hitting the floor as the crowd screamed. CNBC debated the company's stock drop. Hashtag Billionaire collapse had turned into a meme. His PR manager texted nonstop asking for a statement, but Liam ignored them all. He looked out at the skyline of Manhattan, glowing against the dark river. The city pulsed with life below, like circuitry lit by human ambition. But he felt detached, as though he were already fading from it all. He thought of his brother Daniel, the car accident, the guilt that had shaped him into a man obsessed with saving lives. He had built an empire to atone, but somewhere along the way, he had traded humanity for headlines. The door opened again. A nurse adjusted the IV line, then hesitated. "Sir, the press wants to know if you plan to continue the presentation." He let out a small, bitter laugh. "Tell them the show's over." His voice rasped hollow but steady. When the nurse left, he reached for his phone. The screen overflowed with notifications. Messages from board members, shareholders, journalists. He opened none of them. Instead, he scrolled through the comments under the viral video. Someone wrote, "The man who promised to cure cancer can't even save his own heart." He read it twice, then whispered, "They're not wrong." He closed his eyes and the beeping beside him slowed. The city outside blurred into streaks of blue light, the same color that had once glowed in his company's logo, blue for redemption. That was the irony he had. Branded forgiveness and sold it in vials, but had never known how to give it to himself. A knock came at the door. Dr. Ruiz entered again. Her tone softer this time. "We can start treatment, but you should think about what you want to do with your time left. Most people," she said, "choose to travel or reconcile with family." He stared at her. "Family?" He repeated, almost amused. "I don't have any. Only employees, contracts, and investors." She sighed quietly and left him alone with the machines. When the door clicked shut, the silence pressed in on him. He reached for the small notebook by the bed, opened it to a blank page, and wrote 3 words underlined twice. "Find the meaning." His hand trembled as he set the pen down. The night stretched long beyond the window, Manhattan alive but distant. The man who had mastered life sciences now faced the science of dying. At 3 a.m, he watched the city's lights flicker out, one by one, until only his reflection remained, a hollowed man framed by the faint glow of machines. He whispered to it, "This is what legacy feels like, cold and quiet." He closed his eyes again, his heartbeat echoing in the sterile dark. For the first time in years, Liam Hayes felt small and strangely free. He had spent a lifetime saving others, but now there was no one left to save, no one except perhaps himself. The penthouse looked like a glass museum, suspended above Manhattan, cold, clean, and untouched. Liam Hayes stood in the middle of it, still in the same black suit he had worn on stage. His tie undone his hospital wristband, cutting faintly into his skin. The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving a hollow echo that faded into silence. The city outside glittered with 1,000 windows, but inside everything felt lifeless. Every step he took echoed against marble floors, as if reminding him he was walking through a monument to himself. The walls were filled with awards, framed magazine covers, and photographs of him, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. They no longer looked like triumphs, only ghosts. Clara Reed opened the door from the kitchen, startled to see him home so soon. "Mr. Hayes, you should be resting," she said softly. He didn't answer, just nodded, placing his briefcase on the counter and staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. Clara was 25, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, her uniform simple gray. She had been working there for only a year, but she was the only person who hadn't tried to flatter or exploit him. She treated him like a man, not a myth. That night she moved quietly around him, preparing soup, turning down the lights, closing curtains while the TV murmured in the background. He sank into the leather couch, remote in hand, scrolling through channels until he froze. The screen showed his own collapse, replayed again and again, anchors discussing his health, financial analysts speculating on the future of Hayes Therapeutics. The banner read, "Billionaire collapse shocks market." Trending #1. Twitter's feed filled the side of the screen. Comments poured in. "He's faking it. He deserves it." "Hope he's okay," mixed sympathy and mockery. The world that had once worshipped him now dissected him like a specimen. Clara set the bowl of soup beside him. He didn't touch it, just kept staring at a single comment pinned to the screen. "The man who promised to cure cancer can't even save his own heart." He turned off the TV, leaving the apartment drenched in silence, and blue city light reflected off the windows. "They're not wrong," whispered more to himself than to her. Clara hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You've saved lives, sir. You've built things that matter." He smiled without warmth. "I built things to feel like I mattered." She didn't reply. She simply adjusted the blanket over his shoulders and left him alone. The clock ticked past midnight. He walked to the balcony barefoot, the glass door sliding open to the cold air. The skyline spread before him like an endless constellation. He looked down at the streets, cars like red veins pulsing through the city. The air smelled of rain and exhaust. He felt strangely detached from it all, as if he were already a ghost among the living. Inside the apartment, the reflection of his body merged with the skyline, his silhouette dissolving into light. Blue light from the neon signs below painted his face in the same hue that once symbolized his company's slogan, "Blue means life." He almost laughed at the irony. Back inside, Clara had returned, quietly carrying a glass of water and his medication. She saw him standing there motionless through the glass door. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I will," he murmured. His voice was hoarse but calm. She placed the glass beside his bed, turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint city glow filtering through the blinds. As she walked away, he whispered, "Thank you." She paused for a moment, looking back but said nothing, and disappeared down the hallway. Alone again, Liam lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the doctor's words, 6 months, maybe less. He thought about the empire he had built, the thousands of employees, the board meetings, the investors, the countless sleepless nights. He remembered Daniel, his younger brother, laughing behind the wheel before the crash, before the silence that followed. He had spent his entire life trying to resurrect that lost voice through medicine and money. Now even his own heartbeat felt borrowed. The next morning the headlines had multiplied. Paparazzi gathered outside his building, helicopters circling above like vultures searching for movement. Clara drew the curtains tighter. "Sir, the press, they're outside again." "Should I call security?" "No," he said softly. "Let them look. It's the only time they'll actually see me." She frowned, not understanding, but left him alone. He wandered through the penthouse, aimlessly pausing at the glass shelves of awards. Forbes Visionary of the Year, Humanitarian Medal Innovator of Hope. Each plaque gleamed coldly beneath the track lights. He picked one up, the humanitarian medal, and whispered, "I forgot how to be one." The medal felt heavy, colder than he remembered. He left it on the counter, walked into his study, and stared at the photographs of clinical trials. Patients smiling, nurses hugging him back. When he had believed in what he did, he pressed his palm against the glass frame as if he could feel warmth through it, but there was none later. That evening, Clara knocked on his door. "I made tea if you'd like." He didn't respond for a moment, then said, "Leave it by the piano, please." She set the cup down and hesitated before asking, "Is there anyone you'd like me to call? Family, friends?" His expression didn't change. "No one would answer, even if I did call." She opened her mouth to speak, but thought better of it. Instead, she said quietly, "Sometimes people surprise you, sir." He almost smiled at that, but didn't. The night deepened outside Manhattan, breathing in lights and sirens. He stood by the piano, sipping the tea. She left its warmth fleeting between his fingers. The grand instrument had not been played in years, its keys collecting dust. He pressed one key gently. The note echoed long and lonely through the room. He whispered to himself, "I used to love the sound of life." The reflection of blue light from the skyline shimmered across the polished surface of the piano and across his face. He turned off the lamp, letting the city paint him in cold color. The man who once cured others now sat in the dark of his own making. And for the first time since his collapse, Liam Hayes admitted to himself that he was afraid. The next morning's sunlight cut through the blinds, casting pale lines across the marble floor. Liam Hayes sat at the edge of his desk, the weight of sleepless hours heavy under his eyes. The penthouse was silent except for the soft hum of the city below. He had made a decision, one that terrified him more than death itself. Clara Reed entered carrying his morning coffee, careful not to meet his gaze. She placed it down and turned to leave when his voice stopped her. "Clara, sit down, please." She hesitated, her hands stilling on the tray, but obeyed. She took a small step closer, unsure what to expect. He looked at her for a long time, studying her face. Not as an employer studies an employee, but as a man, clinging to a final sense of truth. "You've been here, how long?" he asked. "Almost a year," she replied softly. "You're the only one who doesn't talk about me when I'm not in the room." He managed a thin smile. "That's rare these days." She gave a polite nod, unsure how to respond. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I don't have much time left, Clara." She blinked. "The doctor said 6 months, maybe less." Her lips parted in shock. "Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't know." He waved a hand, dismissing her sympathy. "I'm not telling you for pity, I'm telling you because I need you to understand what I'm about to ask." Her brow furrowed, wary but curious. "Go on, please." He stared at the floor for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't want to die forgotten." She frowned. "You won't be forgotten, Mr. Hayes. You built Hayes Therapeutics. You've saved millions of lives." He shook his head sharply. "They'll remember the company, not the man. They'll remember numbers, not the heartbeat behind them." His voice cracked for the first time in years. He looked up at her eyes steady. "I want a child. I want you to carry it, my last legacy." The words dropped between them like thunder. Clara froze the tray, clattering against the table. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "Sir, what?" She could barely form the words. "You heard me," he said softly. "I want to leave. Something alive before I go. Something more human than a building with my name on it." Clara's face flushed with confusion and disbelief. "That's not something I can just do," she stammered. I'm not married. I don't even—" She trailed off, unable to speak. He nodded slowly. "I know what I'm asking. It's impossible, inappropriate, insane. But it's the only thing that makes sense now. I've spent my life saving others. Now I want something to remember me beyond the headlines." He rose from his chair, walking toward the window, his reflection fractured by the sunlight. "I don't want to buy this. I don't want to force it. I need to ask." He turned back to her eyes, weary but sincere. "I'm not asking for love, Clara. I'm asking for trust and the chance to make this life mean something." She felt her heart pounding so loud it drowned the city noise behind them. The man before her wasn't the untouchable billionaire she had served. He looked smaller, broken human. She swallowed her breath, trying to steady. "Herself, I can't decide something like that right now." Her voice trembled. "Of course," he said quietly. "Take your time, I'll respect whatever answer you give." She stared at him, tears forming unbidden. "I always thought if I gave myself to someone, it would be for love, not for legacy." His gaze softened. "I'm not asking you to love me," he said. "I'm asking you to help me, leave a piece of hope in the world." Silence settled over the room, thick and electric. Clara backed toward the door, her hands shaking. "I need time to think." He nodded, understanding. She turned and left quickly, her footsteps echoing down the marble hall until they disappeared. When the door closed, Liam exhaled and leaned against the desk, his body trembling. The city outside roared with life, while his own world felt frozen. He stared at his hands scarred from years of lab work and endless writing. They no longer felt like his own. In the hallway, Clara's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the wall, gasping for air. The weight of his request pressed into her chest, both terrifying and heartbreaking. She walked to her small room at the end of the corridor, sitting on the edge of her bed. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, frightened but not angry. She thought of her mother's final words before she died. "The greatest kindness you can give is to carry someone else's pain." Clara pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering to herself, "He's not trying to use me. He's asking for something only kindness can answer." Downstairs, Liam sat in the dark study, staring at the closed door she had walked through. His heart felt heavier than ever. The penthouse that once symbolized control now felt like a tomb. He looked around at the glass walls, the perfect symmetry, the emptiness. None of it mattered anymore. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted a piece of his empire, but she was the first person who looked at him and saw a man, not a miracle. He whispered into the quiet, "Please say yes, Clara. Just one night, one piece of me, left in this world something to outlive me." The words barely carried beyond his breath. Upstairs, Clara wiped her tears and looked toward the ceiling as if she could feel his voice traveling through it. Her chest tightened with emotions she couldn't name. Pity, empathy, fear, maybe all of them. She thought about what it meant to give life, to carry a legacy that wasn't hers but could mean redemption for someone else. She didn't know if it was right or wrong, only that it felt deeply human. She lay back on her bed, eyes open, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling, wondering if love always had to start with choice, or if sometimes it began with compassion. Outside the window, the sky darkened to a bruised shade of blue, the same color as the Hayes Company logo. The same blue that would soon define the story of two people caught between mortality and mercy. In that silence, both of them sat in different rooms, the same thought echoing through the night. Is kindness enough to save what's left of us? Rain began to fall that night, steady and cold, drumming against the glass walls of the penthouse, like a reminder that the world outside still moved on without them. Clara sat by her window, her reflection blurred by streaks of water. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her blanket, trying to quiet the thoughts that refused to leave. She could still hear his voice echoing from the study, not commanding but pleading. It wasn't power she had seen in his eyes. It was despair and something far more fragile, humanity. Her mother's voice returned to her from years ago, whispered from a hospital bed. Kindness is the only legacy that outlives us. Clara breathed the words softly, letting them fill the silence. The city lights glowed blue against the storm clouds, casting reflections that shimmered like ghosts across the floor. She stood suddenly, unable to sit any longer, and walked down the long hallway, her bare feet silent on the marble. Each step was a decision she didn't fully understand. Her hand hovered over his door for a moment, then she pushed it open without knocking. Liam was at his desk, staring at a blank page on his laptop. The screen's glow painted his face in a cold white light. When he saw her, he froze. "Clara." He said her name slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if spoken too loud. She took a deep breath, her voice barely audible. "If this helps you leave in peace, I'll do it, but not for your name, for your soul." He stared at her for a long moment, unable to speak. The air between them thickened with everything unspoken: gratitude, fear, reverence. He rose from the chair, slowly, his movements uncertain, like a man learning how to exist again. He stepped closer, the sound of rain filling the spaces their words couldn't reach. His eyes softened not with desire but with disbelief that she was real, that someone could still choose to stay near him now. "You don't have to," he whispered. "I know," she said, "but maybe I need to." She took another step, and the room seemed to shrink around them. Tartigean. Glow from the city lights slipped through the window, bathing them both in a muted hue of forgiveness. Blue, the color that once defined his company and now defined something far deeper, her hand lifted trembling as she touched his arm. He closed his eyes at the contact, his breath catching as if it had been years since anyone had reached for him like this. When he looked at her again, his voice cracked. "You're not saving me, Clara. You're giving me a reason to go softly." She didn't answer, only nodded once, tears glinting in her eyes. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rolling faintly over the skyline. He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The world beyond the glass blurred into streaks of blue and silver, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. She stepped closer until she could feel his heartbeat slow and uneven against her chest. Her breath trembled as she whispered, "I'm afraid." He smiled a small broken smile. "So am I." Their foreheads touched for a single suspended second before his lips met hers. It wasn't hunger, it was surrender, the kind of kiss that felt more like prayer than passion. His hand rested against her cheek, thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen between them. The lights of Manhattan flickered across their skin, the rain muting every sound except the rhythm of their breathing. Later, the world seemed to fade into quiet. The storm softened to a whisper as they sat together on the edge of the bed. Fingers intertwined. He looked at her as if memorizing the shape of her face. Every blink a moment he couldn't afford to lose. She met his gaze, not as a servant, not as someone obligated, but as a witness to his final act of faith. They spoke little, only in fragments. He told her about Daniel, his brother, about the crash, about how guilt had driven him to build the company, to try and play God so he could forget how powerless he had once been. She listened without judgment, her thumb tracing circles against his palm. When he faltered, she whispered softly, "You've spent your life saving others. Maybe this time let someone save you." He closed his eyes, tears threatening but never falling. "I don't deserve that. None of us do," she said. "But that's what makes it mercy." He opened his eyes again, the reflection of blue light glimmering across her face. In that moment he saw not a maid, not pity, but something pure, something that made his chest ache in ways no disease could. He reached up, touched her cheek again, memorizing the warmth. "I thought I understood the science of life," he said quietly, "but you just taught me what it means to live." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight I'm here. That's all we have." He nodded once, eyes glistening, "I know." Then they let the silence fill what words could not. The night stretched around them, slow and infinite. Rain tapped softly against the glass, and somewhere beneath it all, a city of millions continued breathing, unaware of the small, fragile miracle unfolding high above. When she finally closed her eyes against his shoulder, she could feel his heartbeat, a faint rhythm steady but fading. The warmth of his skin against hers felt like light breaking through the dark. When he whispered her name again, it was softer than the rain. Thank you, Clara, for reminding me that even at the end there can still be grace. Morning came pale and quiet. The rain had stopped, but its scent still clung to the air. The penthouse felt different somehow, softer, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tenderness of the night. Before Liam Hayes sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, the skyline hazy beyond the glass. He looked fragile and human in a way that would have startled anyone who once knew him. The city that had once obeyed his every decision now moved without him, indifferent and alive. Clara entered silently carrying a tray with tea, her hands steady though her heart was not. She placed it beside him, and for a moment they said nothing. The air between them was no longer filled with tension, but with something gentler understanding. He glanced at her, the faintest smile touching his lips. You didn't have to stay, she replied softly. I didn't know how to leave. He looked out the window again, eyes tracing the horizon. The doctors called this remission, he said, almost laughing. But I think it's just a pause, a chance to say goodbye right this time. Clara sat opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice was small but sure. You don't have to say goodbye, not yet. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I've spent my whole life saying goodbye to people. Daniel, my parents, my own health. Maybe it's time I stop pretending I can outrun it. He coughed a little, his body thin beneath the blanket. When she reached to help, he waved her off gently. I'm fine, he said, though they both knew it was a lie. That afternoon, he asked her to sit with him in the study. It was filled with papers and legal folders that had gathered dust. She noticed one envelope on the desk sealed with his signature. What's that? She asked. He tapped the paper with the tip of his pen. My will, he said simply. You're in it? She froze, her eyes widening. What do you mean, Liam? You can't. He interrupted quietly. It's not about money, Clara. It's about trust. I've named you as guardian of the child, if it exists. I want that part of me to have. Someone who sees the world like you, do not like me. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He looked at her again, his voice low and certain. This isn't charity, it's gratitude. You gave me peace when the rest of the world gave me noise. She blinked fast, fighting the tears threatening to spill. Liam reached across the table, taking her hand, his skin cold but steady. Promise me something, he said. When I'm gone, you live. Don't let this house, this name, this disease become your shadow. She shook her head, whispering, I don't know if I can. I've never been good at letting go. He smiled faintly. Neither have I, but that's how we start over, isn't it? The room fell quiet, only the hum of the city filling the space. He let go of her hand and leaned back in the chair, exhaustion written across his face. As the days passed, his strength waned, each morning became slower, every breath a little heavier. Clara adjusted her hours, staying near his side, reading aloud from books he used to quote. From when he was younger, sometimes he would talk about his brother, again describing the way Daniel used to race him to the river, or the day he built his first microscope in their garage. He told her how he had become obsessed with control, because chaos had stolen everything from him. She listened carefully, knowing these confessions were more important than medicine. In the evenings, she played soft music on the piano, the same one he had touched weeks before. The sound drifted through the halls, gentle and sad. One night, as the city lights flickered blue against the windows, he whispered, "Play the song that sounds like forgiveness." She pressed the keys slowly, each note trembling like a breath. Between chords, she glanced at him. His eyes were closed, but there was peace on his face. When she finished, he exhaled softly. "That's what I wanted," he murmured. Not applause, not legacy, just that feeling of quiet clarity. Days later, he didn't leave his bed. The doctor visited daily, but there was little to do. Machines around him hummed steady, but the rhythm of his heartbeat told a different story. Clara stayed by him, reading from his notebook, the one he had written during his hospital stay. "Find the meaning," she read aloud. He smiled faintly. "Maybe you already did." The sun began to set, painting the room in a golden haze that slowly shifted into pale blue light, the color that had followed them since the beginning. Blue for redemption, light for forgiveness. He looked at her one last time, his voice a whisper, "Promise me you'll live, find light again." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will," she said through the tremor in her voice. He smiled softly. "Thank you for staying." He exhaled once, and the line of his chest stilled. The room filled with stillness, but it wasn't empty. The last rays of sunset bathed everything in a soft white glow, as if the world itself paused to honor him. She pressed her forehead to his hand, whispering through her sobs, "You're free now, Liam." The machines beeped once, then fell. Silent, and in that silence, light flooded the room as though forgiveness itself had taken form, wrapping around both of them until everything was white. 2 weeks passed since Liam's death, and the world had already moved on. The stock market had steadied Hayes. Therapeutics released a polished statement honoring its founder, and the media recycled his story into another corporate legend. Clara remained in the penthouse only because she couldn't yet bring herself to leave. Every room still smelled faintly of him, the ghost of his voice echoing through the marble halls. One morning she woke dizzy, the sunlight too bright. Her hands trembled as she reached for the calendar, counting backwards, her breath quickening when the truth struck. She was late, very late. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The next hour blurred together, pharmacy test, bathroom silence. Then she saw the 2 pink lines, sharp, undeniable. She sank to the floor, pressing her hand to her stomach. "You're his," she whispered. "You're my reason now." Tears fell freely, but they weren't only grief, they were awe. She had carried a man's final wish and turned it into life, but that fragile piece didn't last. 3 days later, the world learned before she could even tell anyone. It began with a headline on a gossip site, "The Maid Who Claims to Be the Billionaire's Heir-Bearer." Within hours it was everywhere, CNN, TMZ, and every online tabloid. The hashtag #TheBillionaire's Maid trended at #1 on Twitter again, this time not for tragedy, but scandal. Photographs of Clara leaving a clinic, paparazzi lenses catching. Her pale face went viral. Threads erupted on Reddit, debates flooded TikTok gold digger, or Miracle One caption asked. The company issued a cold statement denying any knowledge of unverified personal matters concerning the late Mr. Hayes. The comments were brutal. Someone tweeted, "She's cashing in on grief." Another wrote, "Imagine being so desperate you use a dead man's name." Her phone rang nonstop, unknown numbers, unknown voices. Reporters waited outside the building. shouting questions about paternity, about legacy, about shame. Clara stopped answering the door. She closed all curtains, unplugged the phone. Her heart raced every time the elevator chimed. At night, she could see flashes from cameras outside the windows. Like lightning without thunder, her world shrank to the size of one dimly lit apartment. She packed a small bag, intending to leave, but where would she go? Every headline followed her, every whisper twisted into accusation. On the fourth night, she sat by the window, staring at the skyline again. The city that once looked alive now felt like a predator. She placed her hand on her stomach and whispered through tears, "I'm sorry, I never wanted this." The intercom buzzed sharply. She froze, ignoring it. But it buzzed again, and a voice came through, calm, certain. "Clara, it's Michael Grant. I'm Liam's attorney. Please open the door." She hesitated, her pulse quickening. How did he know? She unlocked the door slowly, and there he was. Tall, dark-haired, in a gray overcoat, holding a briefcase and an envelope. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the kind of fatigue that comes from loyalty. He introduced himself softly. "I worked with Liam for 10 years. He asked me to find you if anything happened to him." She blinked, trying to process his words. "Find me." He nodded. Yes, he left specific instructions. He handed her the envelope. It was sealed with Liam's signature. She tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a notarized copy of his will. Her name written clearly, under guardian of unborn child, Liam Hayes. She covered her mouth in disbelief. Michael spoke quietly. "He trusted you, Clara, and he wanted me to make sure you were protected." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "The media is calling me a liar, a thief." He sighed. "I know, that's why we need to make this official. We'll file the paperwork, confirm the pregnancy, and present the will to the board before they bury his name completely." Her eyes filled with tears. "But they'll never believe me." He looked at her with quiet conviction. "Then we'll make them believe." The next days unfolded like a storm. The tabloids grew vicious, printing every rumor they could invent. Former employees claimed she was having an affair before his collapse. Online detectives dissected photos of her in the background of company events, calling her the hidden mistress. Hashtag the Billionaires. Maid evolved into a battlefield. Featured Team Clara defending her innocence, Team Hayes accusing her of manipulation. Talk shows debated her morality. Was she the saint who gave comfort to a dying man, or the opportunist who saw her chance? One viral tweet read, "She didn't steal his money, she stole his story." Clara stopped reading comments altogether. Michael worked tirelessly, filing motions, meeting lawyers, appearing before a probate judge to secure the validity of Liam's last testament. Every night he returned to the apartment, updating her with legal jargon she barely understood. The company's lawyers had already launched their counterclaim. They alleged that the will had been altered posthumously by unknown parties. They wanted everything erased, including her existence. He found recordings Liam had made in the last month, voice memos saved on his phone. Michael played one quietly one evening as they sat across from each other in the dim light. Liam's voice came through, tired but steady. "If this child lives, then so does my humanity." There was silence afterward. Clara covered her mouth, trembling. He really said that. Michael nodded. He meant every word. The next morning, news broke that the recordings were real, authenticated by forensic analysts. For a moment, public opinion began to shift. But the company doubled down, releasing a new statement claiming Liam's mental capacity was compromised in his final days. they tried to turn his illness into their weapon. The court date was set, and Clara found herself thrust into a world she never wanted. Flashing lights, microphones, endless speculation. As she entered the courthouse, cameras flared questions hurled at her. Are you pregnant? Are you lying? Was it love or money? She kept her eyes down, heart pounding. Michael walked beside her, his presence steady, protective. They sat together in the waiting room, the air cold and heavy. She whispered, I'm scared. He replied quietly, courage isn't about not being scared, it's about not letting them define you. She nodded, fighting back tears. When the hearing began, the room was packed with reporters. The company's attorney spoke first, painting her as a manipulative employee who fabricated a relationship to gain wealth. But when Michael stood, his voice was firm, controlled. He presented the will, the recordings, and Liam's medical records, establishing a timeline of coherence. Every piece of evidence built a picture not of scandal, but of trust. Yet the tension remained thick. Outside the courthouse, the media waited hungry. When the session adjourned, journalists swarmed the steps. Someone shouted, "Do you really believe her?" Mr. Grant, Michael paused, turned to face the cameras, and said clearly, "I don't just believe her, I believe in what made him human, her." The words struck like lightning. The clip spread. Across the internet, millions of views in hours. Michael's quote became the meme of the week, turned into artwork tweets, and think pieces about loyalty and love. Public opinion began to tilt. The next hearing concluded 2 days later. The judge's ruling was concise. The unborn child of Liam Hayes shall bear his name and rights of inheritance as defined in the will. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Clara sat frozen, unable to move as tears spilled freely. Michael placed a hand over hers, whispering, "It's over, you won." She shook her head through tears. "No, we just began." Outside reporters cheered her name, flashbulbs exploding. Michael guided her through the crowd, shielding her with his coat. The world that had condemned her now wanted her story. Her face appeared on magazines under a new headline, "The Woman Who Carried His Legacy." As they drove away through the crowded streets, Clara looked out the window. The city lights, once cold, now glowing blue, reflected across her face. The color of forgiveness and survival. The victory in court should have brought peace, but in America, nothing ended quietly. The story of the billionaire's maid became bigger than the truth itself. News outlets fought for exclusive interviews. Hollywood producers called, offering movie rights. Hashtags trended again, but now divided the country into those who believed in love and those who believed in scandal. Clara wanted none of it. She retreated to a small apartment on the Upper West Side, living in shadows, while Michael Grant continued to face the media alone. He handled everything with calm precision, his voice steady and professional. But the strain showed in the tired lines around his eyes. The company Hayes Therapeutics refused to let the matter die. They appealed the ruling, claiming the will's execution had been influenced by emotional coercion. They accused Michael of conflict of interest. They accused Clara of manipulation. Their lawyers were relentless and powerful. The next months became a blur of filings, depositions, and subpoenas. Michael guided her through every one. Clara attended hearings quietly, her stomach growing as the baby developed under the weight of public opinion. Some days protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs reading "Gold Digger, Go Home." Others carried posters that said, "Hope lives through her inside." She remained silent, dignified, refusing to respond to the noise. It was Michael who carried the fight. He became her voice in a world determined to erase her. Each hearing grew more hostile. Lawyers twisted facts, hinted at affairs, even fabricated text messages to stain her name. Clara sat behind the defense table, her hands clasped in her lap, whispering silent prayers. The courtroom smelled of coffee and anxiety. Cameras clicked every time she moved. When it became too much, she looked at Michael across the table. His calm anchored her. Once during cross-examination, the opposing attorney sneered. "So, Mr. Grant, are we to believe this maid was chosen out of love?" He answered evenly. "No, she was chosen out of humanity, something you clearly don't understand." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge paused to glare. The lawyer into silence. The clip leaked online within minutes, turning Michael into an unexpected folk hero. Memes labeled him the gentleman attorney. Talk shows analyzed his tone, his restraint, his quiet defiance. He didn't enjoy the attention, but he used it strategically to shift the narrative. When the media tried to frame Clara as unstable, he released excerpts from Liam's voice memos, authenticated by court experts, proving not only mental clarity, but intention. "I want Clara to raise my child," he had said in one recording. "She knows compassion, not commerce." When the recordings aired live on CNN, something shifted nationwide. #Team Clara overtook Team Hayes for the first time in months. Donations poured into a small foundation Michael had established in Liam's honor, transforming the fight into a symbol of dignity over greed. But Hayes' systems struck back, leaking confidential photos of Clara and Liam in the mansion, painting them as lovers. The internet exploded again. Some claiming it confirmed the affair, others seeing the manipulation for what it was. One night, Clara sat on the couch watching the coverage, her hands shaking. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Michael turned off the TV, kneeling beside her. "You've already done more than you had to. You don't owe anyone proof of your worth." "But they'll keep coming, won't they?" she asked, tears breaking through. He nodded quietly. "They will until they find nothing left to take." She pressed her palms to her stomach, feeling the baby kick. "He said you'd protect us. He said you'd fight." Michael smiled faintly. "I intend to." Weeks later, the final appeal began. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras, drones, banners. "Your justice for Clara," trending worldwide. Inside, tension coiled like a storm. The opposing counsel presented financial reports. Emails alleged inconsistencies, but their foundation was crumbling under public scrutiny. Michael stood at the center, addressing the court with quiet intensity. "Your Honor, this is not about money or fame. This is about a dying man's last attempt to define his humanity through an act of trust. The company wants to erase that because it threatens their illusion of control. Liam Hayes was not a god, he was a man, and this child is proof that redemption is possible, even for the powerful." The room fell silent, his voice echoing against the marble walls. Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. She held his gaze across the courtroom, steady and unafraid. Outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered, candles flickering as night fell. Reporters whispered that the ruling could come within hours. When Michael exited to speak, the press surged forward. The air buzzed with microphones and camera flashes. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Grant, do you really believe her, after everything you've heard?" He turned his head slowly, meeting the lens of the nearest camera square. "I don't just believe her," he said clearly. "I believe in what made him human, her." The quote hit every news cycle within minutes. By morning, it was printed on billboards, edited into inspirational reels, broadcast on talk shows. Across social media, it became a rallying cry. The man who fought for truth, not profit, became the symbol of quiet heroism. Clara watched it unfold from her apartment, hand pressed to her heart. "People are finally seeing him for who he was," she said softly. "No," Michael replied, "they're seeing you." Weeks later, the judge returned her verdict. The court finds the will valid and uncoerced. The unborn child of Liam Hayes shall remain the rightful heir of his estate and company legacy. The gavel struck. The sound felt like thunder. Clara bowed her head, tears sliding silently as relief poured through her body. Michael squeezed her hand, whispering, "It's over," but she shook her head. "It's never over, not for people like us." He smiled softly. "Maybe not, but at least now you can start." The aftermath was chaos again. Reporters filled the steps outside, asking about marriage, about future plans. Michael shielded her with his coat, leading her to the waiting car. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of him, guiding her through the storm. A photograph of that moment went viral worldwide. The caption read, "The Billionaire's Maid, finally free." Inside the car, Clara stared out at the streets, New York blurred into streaks of neon blue. The reflection on the window painted her skin in the same hue that had followed her since the beginning. Blue for redemption, light for forgiveness. She turned to Michael, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you fight this hard for someone like me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because he asked me to, and because I wanted to." She turned away, her chest tightening from gratitude. Too deep to name, weeks past the legal battles settled, and the scandal began to fade, replaced by new tragedies and new headlines. But for those who had followed the story, it had become more than gossip. It was now a parable about grace, about the strange endurance of goodness in a world that loved to destroy it. On the anniversary of Liam's death, a quiet memorial was held in the Hayes Corporate Plaza. Michael spoke briefly, his voice carrying over the crowd. He didn't die trying to build an empire. He died trying to build a legacy of compassion. And that legacy lives in her. He gestured toward Clara, standing beside him, visibly pregnant, radiant in a simple blue dress. The crowd applauded, but she didn't speak. Her silence said enough. Later that night, they walked along the East River, the wind sharp but gentle. She asked him, "Do you think people can change?" Michael looked at the city lights shimmering across the water. "I think some people just remember who they were always meant to be." She smiled faintly, watching the reflection of blue light dance on the surface. The scandal that once consumed her life had given birth to something else, not just survival, but renewal. In that quiet moment beneath the skyline, Clara Reed finally believed what Liam had once whispered before dying. "Promise me you'll live, find light again." And for the first time, she knew she already had. After the storm, the world finally fell quiet. Clara left New York without warning. One dawn in late autumn, the headlines had cooled. The noise had faded, and what remained was a hollow kind of silence. She took a train north past cities and skylines until skyscrapers gave way to trees. Her destination was a small town in Vermont, where the mountains touched the clouds and no one cared about last names. The house she rented was small, white with creaking steps, and a porch that smelled like pine. It was the kind of place Liam would have never lived in yet. Somehow she knew he would have loved it. She found peace in the simplicity, morning light, spilling through sheer curtains, a kettle whistling in the kitchen, and a slow rhythm of days built from routine rather than survival. Her belly grew, and so did her resolve. She wrote letters to the unborn child every night, sealed them in a box marked "For when you're ready." In them she spoke of kindness, of mistakes, of the blue light that once surrounded a dying man who found peace in forgiveness. When winter came, the snow fell thick and heavy. Covering everything in white silence, she went into labor one morning while watching the snowfall alone. The pain came fast, raw, relentless, but beneath it was a strange calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Hours later, she held her son against her chest, tiny, fragile, perfect. She whispered his name, Eli Hayes. The name tasted like light, like continuation. She cried then, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. For all the endings that had become beginnings, word spread quietly about the birth. Michael arrived 2 weeks later, driving up the winding Vermont road, carrying groceries and blankets and a small stuffed bear. He looked older, more tired, but when he saw her holding the baby, his face softened completely. He said nothing at first, only smiled before kneeling beside her chair. "He looks like him, doesn't he?" Clara nodded. "He has his eyes, but his calm. That's all yours." Michael chuckled low, that kind of laughter. That feels like a confession. They built a rhythm without meaning to. He came by every week, sometimes staying for hours, helping fix leaks, cooking dinner, rocking the baby when she needed rest. He never asked for more, never intruded. He simply existed beside her like a steady heartbeat. In those quiet afternoons when the wind rattled the window panes and the fire flickered blue, she would watch him cradle Eli, his big hands impossibly gentle, and something in her chest would ache in the most beautiful way. One evening near spring, she found a small box on her doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a sapphire necklace, the same one Liam's mother had once worn. She recognized it from photos Michael had found it while closing Liam's estate. She lifted it gently, the gem catching the firelight until it glowed deep ocean blue. Michael stood at the doorway watching her. "It suits you," he said quietly. "Blue, the color of second chances." She turned toward him, eyes glistening. "You really believe in those?" He smiled softly. "I do now." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth from his coat. She handed him the necklace wordlessly, and he fastened it around her neck. His fingers brushed the back of her skin, lingering for just a second, long enough for both to feel it. The air between them pulsed with unspoken truths. When she looked up, their faces were inches apart, but neither moved instead, letting the silence speak everything that words would ruin. From that night on, things shifted subtly. He came more often, not out of duty, but something deeper. He read bedtime stories to Eli, built a crib from scratch, taught Clara how to fix the heater when it froze. They became a small, strange family, bound not by obligation, but by grace. Each day brought new warmth to replace what had once been cold. The snow melted into wildflowers, and laughter filled the house. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since before her mother died. Her first canvas was of a field under a pale blue sky, with two figures standing in the light, holding a child between them. She called it forgiveness. One evening she and Michael sat on the porch, watching Eli chase fireflies barefoot through the grass. The sky blushed purple and gold fading into blue. She whispered sometimes, "I still feel him here." Michael nodded. "He'd like that," she said, "that his story didn't end with loss, that it became something good." Michael looked at her, then eyes steady, and full of quiet awe. "You were the good," he said. She shook her head. "No, he just saw it before I did." They fell silent again, listening to the crickets and the wind. The necklace caught the last light of dusk and reflected across her collarbone, glimmering like a promise. The world around them felt softer, more alive, the kind of peace you don't chase but earn through pain, through love born of tragedy, through forgiveness found in the wreckage. As night settled in, Michael took a breath, as if trying to hold the moment still. He said, "You know, there's a word for this in law. It's called equitable remedy when justice takes a form no one expects." She smiled, looking down at Eli curled up asleep beside her. "Then maybe life's the greatest court there is, and tonight we finally won." He laughed low and warm, the sound blending with the night. In the distance, church bells rang from town, marking the hour. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, remembering the first time she'd heard bells after Liam's death. How empty they'd felt then. Now they sounded like peace. The porch light flickered blue against the wooden railing, the necklace at her throat glowing faintly as if carrying the memory of everything that had come before redemption had found her, not in wealth or fame, but in the quiet hum of life continuing, in the soft laughter of a child, in the gentle presence of a man who stayed. She reached out, resting her hand over Michael's, their fingers interlacing naturally without ceremony or fear. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because the world believed her story, but because she finally believed in her own. Tomorrow would come with new challenges. The media might rediscover her name. The world might twist the narrative again, but tonight, under the vast blue sky of Vermont, Clara Reed had everything she needed. A child born of mercy, a love born of patience, and a light that refused to die. The wind shifted cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine through the night. He glanced at her and said quietly, "You found the light." She smiled, eyes glimmering like the necklace beneath her chin. "No," she whispered, "we found it." The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, nearly a year after Eli was born. Clara had just finished feeding him when the mailman knocked, leaving a small envelope on the porch. It was cream-colored, old-fashioned, the kind people rarely used anymore. Her name written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Clara Reed, CEO Hayes Estate, Vermont. The handwriting made her heart stop. She traced the letters with her thumb, her pulse quickening. She opened it carefully, afraid to breathe. Inside was a single folded sheet, yellowed at the edges with a faint scent of cologne she remembered too well. At the top, the date was written in small blue ink, the week before he died. "Dear Clara, if you're reading this, it means life won. Somehow I wanted that for you more than anything." He went on to write about the days in the hospital, about how he had stopped fearing death the night she walked into his room and said yes to his impossible wish. He wrote about Daniel, his brother, about regret and grace, and how every act of kindness she had shown became the medicine he could never invent. His words were steady, deliberate, even tender. "You gave me what no cure ever could, peace. I've built my empire on logic, but you taught me faith. Not in God, perhaps, but in goodness itself. If you ever doubt yourself, remember this. The world will always misjudge what it doesn't understand, but light doesn't need permission to shine. I hope by now you've found your own." She read the words over and over, tears falling freely. Onto the page, smudging the ink, she pressed the letter to her chest, holding it like a heartbeat. Michael found her there a few minutes later, crouched on the floor beside the couch, the letter trembling in her hands. He took it gently, reading silently. His expression softened when he reached the last line. "Tell her I forgive myself because she made it possible." Michael looked at her eyes filled with quiet awe and grief. He forgave himself, Clara nodded through tears. And maybe he forgave me too. He sat beside her, letting the silence breathe between them. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, the soft rustle like a voice carried from another world. She turned to him, her voice breaking. He found redemption, Michael. And maybe so can we. He reached for her hand, their fingers meeting in the space between grief and gratitude. The letter lay open on the coffee table, its ink glistening faintly in the morning light. The sapphire necklace around her neck caught the sun's scattering blue reflections. Across the walls, a quiet reminder that even sorrow could glow. She leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder. Her tears dampened his sleeve, but he didn't move. He just breathed with her, slow and steady. The same rhythm he had kept since the day they met. He whispered, "You know, when he asked me to take care of you, I thought he meant legally." "Not like this," she smiled weakly. Maybe he knew this was the only way we'd both heal. They sat together for a long time, the baby asleep between them, the world outside still and forgiving. Later that evening, when the sky turned violet, she took the letter outside to the porch. The mountains were wrapped in clouds, the air cool enough to make her shiver. She lit a small candle, placing it beside the letter, and whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you for finding me in the dark." She folded the letter carefully, placing it in a wooden box with Eli's first drawings and the hospital bracelet. Then she turned and saw Michael standing by the door watching her. He looked unsure for once, his composure cracked by something deeper. He said quietly, "He'd be proud of you." She smiled faintly, "He'd be proud of us." He hesitated for only a moment before crossing the porch, his hand brushing her cheek. She closed her eyes and let herself lean into it. The kiss that followed was soft, hesitant, the kind born not of longing but recognition. It felt like exhaling after holding one's breath for too long. The candle flickered beside them, its flame bending toward the wind, but never going out. When they parted, she looked up at him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "What now?" she asked. He smiled gently. Now we live for the first time. That answer didn't sound like a burden. It sounded like freedom. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and pine, the same blend that had surrounded Liam's final days. But tonight it didn't smell like goodbye, it smelled like forgiveness. Michael took her hand, leading her inside as thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The baby stirred, and she bent to lift him, cradling him close. His small fingers brushed her necklace, the sapphire glinting blue against his skin. She whispered softly to him, "Your father found peace, so will we." Later, as night deepened, she stood by the window, holding Eli, watching the candle's flame. From the porch still glowing through the glass, Michael approached quietly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Resting his chin against her shoulder, the city girl she once was gone. In her place stood a woman who had walked through scandal and sorrow and come out luminous. "You found the light," he whispered. She smiled, closing her eyes against his warmth. "Maybe the light found me." Outside, the stars pierced the dark sky like fragments of something once broken, now whole. The candle flickered one last time before dying out, leaving behind a faint wisp of smoke, curling upward like a prayer carried to the heavens. and for the first time since Liam Hayes collapsed under the stage lights of New York, Clara Reed felt that every life, no matter how short, could echo forever in the hearts it touched. 3 years later, Vermont was bathed in the kind of golden light that made everything feel forgiven. The mountains were green again, the rivers full and alive. Clara Reed stood on the steps of a white wooden building, her hands trembling not from fear but from awe. The sign above her read, "The Hayes House of Light Community Medical Center." She had built it from the ground up with the settlement money she never wanted, but used to honor him. Inside were rooms filled with laughter and healing mothers, cradling babies' nurses, humming under their breath, patients reading under warm lamps. The smell of fresh coffee and disinfectant mixed with the faint scent of pine carried from the open windows. Every detail had meaning. The walls were painted pale blue, the same shade that had followed her since the day she met Liam Hayes, the color of redemption and forgiveness. Eli, now 3, ran down the hallway, giggling his small shoes, tapping against the wood floors. Michael chased after him, pretending to be out of breath when he caught him, laughter spilling through the air that once carried only sorrow. When he looked up, his eyes met Clara's across the room, and in that quiet glance, the entire journey came rushing back. The hospital lights, the courtrooms, the snow, the letter, the candle. She smiled softly as if to say, "We made it." That afternoon, they gathered in the garden for the dedication ceremony. The town had come to celebrate curious locals, former colleagues, even journalists who once doubted her. The media now called her the woman who turned scandal into sanctuary. But to the people of Vermont, she was simply Clara, the woman who built hope. Michael stood beside her dressed simply, no longer the attorney chasing justice, but the man who had learned to live. He watched her as she took the podium, the sapphire necklace catching sunlight around her throat. The crowd hushed when she began to speak, her voice calm steady. "Liam once said he wanted to leave something human behind," she said softly. "I think he did not, through money or medicine, but through the reminder that kindness can heal what power cannot. This place isn't just for him. It's for anyone who's ever been broken and still chooses to build." She paused, looking toward the hills where wildflowers bent in the wind. "For years I thought legacy meant being remembered," she continued. "Now I know it means giving others the chance to live." Her words drifted through the crowd like a prayer, gentle and unwavering. When she finished, applause rose, not thunderous but heartfelt. The mayor handed her a small plaque inscribed with a quote from Liam's letter, "Light doesn't need permission to shine." Tears filled her eyes as she read it. Michael took her hand, steadying her, and when she looked at him, she saw not pity but pride. After the ceremony, children played in the garden. Eli ran to her holding a dandelion. "Mom," he said, "make a wish." She knelt beside him, smiling. "What should I wish for?" He thought for a moment, his eyes bright like the morning sky. "For the light to never go out." She kissed his forehead. "The light never will. I promise." Evening fell slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and blue. The crowd dispersed, leaving only the 3 of them under the archway of the center. Fireflies began to dance across the fields. The building glowed behind them, windows lit like stars. Michael took a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple silver ring. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech. He just looked at her the way a man does when he's certain she froze. "Breath-catching Michael," he whispered. "Clara, I don't have much to give except a promise. I'll keep showing up even when the world stops watching." She covered her mouth, tears streaming silently. Eli tugged her hand. "Mommy, say yes." She laughed through her tears. Yes, she said the word, trembling but true. He slipped the ring on her finger, and in that instant everything that once hurt found meaning again. The wind picked up, carrying the faint chime of the church bell from the valley below, the necklace around her. Neck shimmered in the last light of day, blue merging with gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. Later, as the guests departed and the stars emerged, they stood together at the edge of the field watching Eli chase fireflies barefoot. Through the grass, the air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets and laughter. The world felt wide open, endless. Michael slipped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. He said quietly, "You built this from ashes." She rested her head against him, smiling softly. "We built it." He kissed the top of her hair, the gesture simple but filled with all the things they didn't need to say. A photographer captured that moment without them knowing. The woman in the blue light, the man holding her, and the child running ahead into the glow. The photo would later hang in the lobby of the center, beneath a brass plate engraved with the words, "He asked for a legacy." What he left was love, and what she gave was light. Years passed, but the photo never faded. Visitors often stopped to look at it not for fame, but for the story. It told a story of mercy, born from ruin, and hope, born from grief. On quiet nights, Clara sometimes sat alone in her office, writing letters for the future, one for Eli, one for the patients, one for the girl she used to be. She would end them all the same way. Find light again, because it's always there if you choose to see it. On the anniversary of Liam's death, she returned to New York for the first time. Walking alone through the plaza, where he had collapsed, the city was loud in different neon lights flashing. But for a moment she closed her eyes and could still hear his voice. "You're not saving me. You're giving me a reason to go softly," she whispered into the noise. "Thank you for teaching me how to stay." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it was no longer pain. It was gratitude. When she returned to Vermont that night, the sky was awash in blue, the same shade that had followed her through every ending and beginning. She stood at the door watching Eli, asleep in Michael's arms, and realized this was the ending Liam had always wanted. Not grandeur, not legacy, but peace. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the soft hum of the chimes outside. The world felt sacred again. Before turning off the light, she looked once more at the necklace glowing faintly in the dark, the last thread of his memory alive and eternal. Then her voice broke the quiet, not in sorrow but in invitation. "If you believe love can outlive death, tell me in the comments.